Hi everyone, my name is Shazia Khan, and today's session that we'll be doing is Managing Employment Relations and Employment Law. And the session is the final session for today's unit, which is the Level 7 unit. And the session we've got today is assignment discussion session. So before I go into the assignment discussion session, I'm going to give you an overview of what we did in the last learning outcomes, which was 4 learning outcomes. So before we could go on with the assignment discussion, the first learning outcome we looked at was learning outcome 1, which was to look at the key concepts in employment law in a country. And we looked at what is employment law? Why does it exist? And looked at the element of why do we need employment legislation? Whether, what is the main reason for the fact that we need it within organizations or within a business. We also looked at what was meant by employment legislation and what the aim of employment legislation was in regards to learning outcome 1. We looked at the main features of employment legislation, so things like minimum wage, hours worked, discrimination, health and safety, holiday entitlement, redundancy, dismissal, disciplinary procedures, training, and union rights. We also looked at, in learning outcome 1 is 1.1, which was to examine the aims and objectives of employment legislation. And that will come in your assignment discussion as well, so we'll look a little bit more at that. So what the aims and objectives of employment legislation is, obviously the main element of it is to guarantee rights for employees within the workplace. We looked at US employment laws, and we looked at Department of Labour, and we looked at Canada's standards, and we referred to the issues around employment law within Canada. We looked at the Combination Act 1800 and how that was abolished by the Combination Act 1799 in regards to the purpose of employment law conditions. We went on to look at who is an employee. So that's really important within the Employment Rights Act, who is an employee, and it's literally an individual who's entered into works of employment for a contract for monetary purposes. So obviously once they comply with the contract, they will be paid for their services. We looked at discrimination within the Race Relations Act 1976, together with the Sex Discrimination Act 1975. We looked at discrimination on the grounds of sex. We looked at remedies to discrimination. We looked at unfair discrimination and the 4 stages to unfair discrimination. We also looked at 1.2, which is to analyse the impact of regulatory and legal requirements on human resource policies in an organisation. So practices and policies that are in place. We looked at Equal Opportunities Discrimination Act, the European Working Time Directive, National Minimum Wage Act, Data Protection Act, Work and Families Act. We looked at the Employment Right Act, Health and Safety Act, and the Employment Relations Act 1999. We then went on to look at the regulatory framework in regards to dismissal and redundancies. We looked at the ACAS practice. We then went on to look at 1.3, which was to the impact of ethical requirements on human resource policies in an organisation. So major issues in ethical management, things like privacy, equal opportunity, labour costs, opportunity for new skills, fair working conditions, etc. We then went on to look at what is ethical practice in an organisation and why ethical practice is so important in regards to different organisations. Things like culture improves the morale, good relations with customers. Ethical companies outperform their peers financially in the long term, and reputation, why reputation is so important based on ethical practices. We looked at a leadership imperative in regards to ethics. We then went on to look at the HR and people in profession. We went to look at 1.4, which is explain the purpose of human resource policy, why human resource policy is so important within an organisation or a business, the importance of HR policies, and why we must follow them and comply with the employment legislation. We looked at development of workplace policies, things like policy examples, vacation time policy, dress code, confidentiality policy, ethics policy, internet usage policy. We went on to look at legal regulatory requirements and HR policies. We looked in Learning Outcome 1 at an example of Tesco and looked at their employment, labour standards, privacy legislation and health and safety. And that was Learning Outcome 1. Then we went on to Learning Outcome 2. In Learning Outcome 2, we looked at understanding recruitment and selection legislations in a country. We looked again at who is an employee within the Employment Rights Act 1996. We looked at the catamaran cruisers case, which looked at what qualifies as an employee. We looked at discrimination with reference to the Shamoon case, Shamoon and Chief Constable of Royal Ulster Constabulary. We then went on to look at discrimination on grounds of sex, remedies to discrimination. We looked at recruitment and selection process. So how the process goes from stage 1, where you define the requirements. So that would be the job description and job specification. Stage 2, attract potential employees, such as job advertising, a job. And then stage 3, select right people. So the job interview and the ability tests. And the selection process in regards to the initial screening, the completion of the application, employment law test if there's one, comprehensive interview, background examination, medicals, and then permanent job offer. We looked at why does HR need to follow legislation for recruitment and selection purposes and why it's so important. We looked at discrimination with reference to the Sex Discrimination Act and the Race Relations Act, Disability Discrimination and Equal Pay Act. We looked at elements of sexual harassment and what motivates that. Then we looked at 2.1 to evaluate the principles of discrimination legislation in relation to recruitment and legislation. So types of sexual discrimination, direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, victimization, positive discrimination, remedies, victimization. Then we went on to look at 2.2 to critically evaluate the role of contracts in employment. So why contracts are so important within employment law and why it's a legally binding agreement between an employee and an employer. We looked at what is contract of employment. So we looked at express terms, implied terms, and why they're so important in a contract. We then want to look at examples of terms that are implied into a contract, include things like the duty of mutual trust and confidence, the employer's duty to provide a safe system to work, the right to minimum period of notice, equality relating to the pay of women and men. And we looked at the UK legal position in regards to employment law and looked at types of contracts. So you have, so there's 3 main types of employment status that the UK recognises: an employee, a worker, and self-employed. And we looked at various tests used to decide whether a person is an employee, including things like mutuality of obligation, control, integration, and multiple. So these were elements of the different types of contracts. We then went on to look at varying in employment contracts. So, you know, how you would vary existing terms, contractual terms, where the required agreement. We went on to look at where employers who wish to alter existing contractual terms have 3 main options. Firstly, to agree the changes with the employee after thorough consultation. Secondly, make changes unilaterally. And thirdly, to terminate the employee's contract by notice and offer them re-engagement on new terms and conditions. So these are 3 main options. We then went on to look at any variations should be confirmed in writing within 1 month of the changes taking place. Additional points to consider: changes following the transfer of undertakings. While there's no legal requirement for employees to sign their written statement, it makes it easier for an employer to rely on any clauses. We looked at certain clauses such as mobility clauses, and we looked at the legal remedies in employment contracts, reinstatement, re-engagement and compensation. And then we looked at 2.3, which is to analyse the mechanism for establishing contracts of employment. So we looked at how to enter into a contract of employment, express implied terms, the advantages of this, things like probationary period, notice period, confidentiality, termination and post-termination restrictions. We looked at express terms within Section 1 of the Employment Law Acts 1996. And we looked at implied terms as well, and then looked at varying terms finally. So that was learning outcome 2 within. That was done all within learning outcome 2. So the next one we looked at was learning outcome 3. Within learning outcome 3, we looked at understanding aspects of employment protection given to different types of workplace, types of workforce. So we looked at employment protection legislation, which is referred to as EPL, and the importance of this and why it's needed within an organisation. We looked at employment protection legislation indexed by the OECD and what this index deals with. We looked at 3.1, which was to analyse the legislative and procedural protection that exists for workers. We looked at arbitration, 3 forums, so employment tribunals, the common law courts, which is the High Court or the County Court, and the recently introduced arbitration scheme operated by a government body called the Advisory Conciliation and Arbitration Service, which is ACAS. We looked at trade unions, why they set up, what is a trade union, what's their activities, what do they do? So they deal with changes including things like national minimum wage, the abolition of child labour, improved working safety, improving living conditions, improved parental leave, equality legislation. We looked at how trade unions work. Union reps actually negotiate agreements with employers on pay and conditions, discuss major changes such as redundancy, discuss members' concerns with employees, accompany members to disciplinary and grievance meetings, help members with legal financial problems. We looked at employment tribunals and why they're specialist employment courts and what they deal with. So any sort of issues arising from dispute, discrimination, they would deal with that. And there would be any sort of claims brought, the employment protection legislation, things like unfair discrimination and discrimination claims. We looked at what the employment tribunals comprise of. So 3 members, a legally qualified chair, 2 lay people, and their decisions can be appealed by the Employment Appeals Tribunal. We looked at common law courts. We looked at ACAS arbitration scheme, which was set up on 21st of May 2001, and the procedure around that. We looked at the protected characteristics within the discrimination, which is age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, maternity and pregnancy, race, religion, belief, and sex. We looked at examples of unfair treatment of employee. We looked at 3.2, which is to examine the legal consequences of unfair treatment of an employee, and gave examples such as if you're an job applicant, also if you're an employee or a worker, and gave some examples there. We looked at bullying within the workplace and why that was so important in regards to, you know, trying to avoid any sort of bullying, which turns out to be a form of harassment. We looked at 3.3, which is to apply law relating to the nature of protection for workers to a given situation. We looked at termination of employment. We looked at wrongful dismissal, so the nature of a claim. An employee can bring an action for breach of a contract. We looked at the UK Employment Guide, which looks at defences, compensation, damages to failure to follow disciplinary procedures, and damages for failure to follow the statutory dismissal and disciplinary procedure, SDP. We looked at what garden leave was and why that was so important in regards to employment law and how that applies in regards to businesses and organisations. We looked at unfair dismissal in regard to entitlement to claim, constructive dismissal and potentially fair reasons for dismissal, and whistleblowing and importance of whistleblowing within employment law, and looked at the Public Interest Disclosure Act in regard to protecting individuals who blow the whistle in public interest. So that was learning outcome 3. We then went on to the final learning outcome is learning outcome 4, which looked at analysing organisational level employment relations, processes, functions and procedures. In that, we looked at, again, to introduce the area, looked at employee relations and what that is in today's society, and what it describes, literally the relationship between the employees and the employer. We looked at theories of employment relations, main theories of employment relations, which are the pluralist, unitarist, Marxist and radical. So we looked at the unitarist theory, which highlights the employees and employers' codependency. We looked at the element of the pluralist theory, which looks at a relationship that highlights the functions and processes of trade unions. And then also, we looked at the pluralist theory, the radical theory, Marxist theory, and then we looked at 4.1, which is critically analyse the roles and functions of different stakeholders in managing the employment relationship. A key issue for employers is whether they're equipping their managers with skills to manage relationships. We looked at individuals, contract law, we looked at collective relationships, employee relationships in time of COVID-19. We looked at managing employee relation and workplace conflicts. We looked at employee relation skill set in learning outcome 4. We looked at the relationship between stakeholders and the organisations and the importance of public and voluntary sector organisations. We looked at 4.2, assessing the impact of external context and organisational level employment relations, processes on employment organisational performance. We looked at the style of management, employee empowerment, flexible organisational structures, empowerment strategies, and the importance of them. We looked at bargaining with trade unions. We also looked at the element of employees' code of conduct and performance and why that's so important in regards to the element of, working in an organisation and having an effective practice in place. We also looked at the organisational conflicts and why they need to be dealt with when it comes to elements of conflict within an organisation. We also looked at competitive work environment and managing conflicts and implementing changes. We looked at the element of employee management strategies and improved communication. We looked at increased productivity, reducing workplace conflicts. We looked at antecedents to employee engagement. So we looked at the voice, employment relations and engagement, so a collaborative approach. We looked at the two aspects of Pearson's quote in regard to the concept of voice. We looked at comparing engagement and burnout. We also looked at HRM roles and associated expectations, so being professional, rule enforcer, honest broker, champion, cheerleader. And that was the end of learning outcome 4. Now we're going to go on to the assignment discussion. So I've gone through all the learning outcomes, so you've got a bit of brief idea that what we did, but they've all recorded and they're all on Moodle for you. So the assignment discussion. So the aim of this unit is to develop learners' understanding of the key principles that underpin managing employment relations. The learners will develop understanding of employee relation and employment law, and their purpose, specifically focusing on recruitment and selection legislation and the employment protection provided for different types of organisations. So the learning outcomes for this unit, there are 4 learning outcomes. First one is to understand key concepts in employment law in a country. Learning outcome 2 is to understand recruitment and selection legislation in a country. Learning outcome 3 is to understand aspects of employment protection given to different types of workforce. Learning outcome 4 is to analysing organisational level employment relations, processes, functions and procedures. So assignment declaration. Now, before you do an assignment, you've got to sign your declaration. And the whole point of this declaration is to confirm that the work you've done is your own work and the assignment is your own work, and that you've read and understand the guidance on plagiarism, which is really, really important, that you do not plagiarize your work and you make sure you reference your work in your bibliography and in text as well. You fully reference, including page numbers, and provide the sources. So you are declaring that the work you have done, you followed the college policies on plagiarism, and the work that you've done is your own work, that it's not anyone else's work, because it's really important that you identify that to make sure that you are following the elements of UK Varsity, but also the policy in regards to plagiarism. And the link for that is the link there, and you have to sign this declaration when you submit your assignment. So when you submit your assignment, you have 2 weeks after this unit has now finished, and then you will submit your assignment. You need to sign a declaration of originality to say that your work is your own work and that it's not being plagiarized, and that you followed the policy of plagiarism, and you are making sure that you referenced your work and that you followed good academic practice in regards to using referencing, in regards to in-text referencing, in regards to using books and making sure you reference the books. So let's go on to the next bit. What you need to include before you do the assignment. So what information needs to go on the assignment? So firstly, your name, your registration number, unit level, which in this case is level 7, managing employment relations and employment law. Make sure you page number your each page as well to identify in your contents page, because it's so important you have a contents page when it comes to doing your assignment. Plagiarism and collusion, and that I will keep going, reiterating back to that. It's really, really important you do not plagiarize your work. Students must submit and complete work that is their own. Plagiarism is presented the thoughts, ideas and words of another person as if they were your own. Collusion may occur when students' assignments are very similar and in some cases identical to that of another fellow student. This almost is also amongst to plagiarism. Plagiarism is taken very seriously, and the students are strongly recommended to refer to the academic misconduct policy, which is available on Moodle, which is a virtual learning environment. So you need to make sure that you are going on Moodle and reading all the policies in place in regards to completing your assignment, because you need to make sure that you are following the element of plagiarism and collusion, and making sure you are following the policy and not plagiarizing your work, as you have signed that declaration. So it's literally to say that I followed the policy and I've not copied anyone's work. So at the start of the assignment, you should include the following: a table of contents. It's really important you have a table of contents to identify which element and which part of the assignments you've done to get that complete and which page it's on. Font size needs to be 12 and needs to be 1.5 line spacing. Again, page numbers, as I mentioned, and I'll keep mentioning, need to be inserted. A brief introduction at the start of the assignment, and make sure you've got putting all your assessment criteria in headings, and make sure you are not changing the wording of the assignment. What the wording says, what the task says, you must just copy and paste that into your Word and then write under that. Do not change the wording, please. General information. So the top part of this unit will be delivered as it has all been delivered online. Number of text related, additional reading, any sort of ebooks or anything is available on Moodle for you, which is, as I mentioned, virtual learning environment, where you can refer to any sort of material. All the recordings are on there for learning outcome 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so you need to be referring to them and any sort of appropriate additional reading or ebooks. So make sure you are following the guidance. Make sure you are looking at the general information. Make sure you are going on to Moodle and reading the policies, especially the policies for plagiarism and referencing. Make sure you're using the Harvard referencing system. So assignment brief. So this is what is required, and then we'll go through the tasks. Scenario: you are recently appointed as head of employee relations for a large organization. The organization is going through a change of leadership, which is having a direct impact on employment. Your immediate job is to look into various aspects of human resource, such as employee contracts, employee relations, employment law, and other regulatory issues. You should ideally choose one from the following businesses to base your research on: McDonald's, which is an American hamburger and fast food restaurant chain; Nike, which is an American multinational corporation; Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu Limited, which is an accounting and professional services network; University of Cambridge; Oxfam, which is the Oxford Committee for Famine Relief; British Broadcasting Centre, which is BBC, or an organisation of your choice approved by your tutor. You are required to prepare a management briefing for the board of directors. Task 1 of 1, management briefing instructions. So there's 2 parts to task 1, part A and part B. It's in a report format and it will consist of the following 2 parts. Part A will cover learning outcome 1, AC 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 and 1.4, and will cover learning outcome 2, 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Part B will look at learning outcome 3 and cover AC 3.1, 3.2 and 3.3. And learning outcome 4 will cover AC 4.1, 4.2 and 4.3. So there are 2 parts to it, task 1, and you need to be differentiating between both parts, because the learning outcomes, part A will cover learning outcome 1 and 2, and part B will cover learning outcome 3 and 4. So let's go into task 1, part A. So task 1, part A, learning outcome AC 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, learning outcome 2, AC 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. And where I've put in red is where you will find the answers, but also you would find all the information on there. So the first part of it, there's in task 1, part A. Firstly, you need to examine aims and objectives of employment legislation. You need to make sure that this is a heading and then you write under it. Do not change the wording. So each part of it that you do, you need to make sure you're writing the heading, okay, and you will write under this. So you're examining the elements of aims and objectives of employment law, and that is looking at learning outcome 1, AC 1.1, and it's on page 7 onwards on the slides, okay? So you need to look at page 7 onwards and you look at the different objectives, things like minimum wage, safe workplace, what the objectives and aims of employment law is, to create a homogeneous employment, workplace. Then that is AC 1.1, page 7 onwards. Then the second part of it, which needs to be in a heading, you need to analyse the impact of regulatory and legal requirements on human resource policies in an organisation. And again, that is learning outcome 1, and you need to look at AC 1.2 and you need to look at pages 21 onwards. And that would be looking at things like, you know, the different laws, Equal Opportunities Discrimination Act, Sex Discrimination Act 1975, Race Discrimination Act 1976, Disability Discrimination Act 1995, European Working Time Directive, National Minimum Wage Act, Data Protection Act 1998, Work and Families Act 2006, and there's others as well. But you need to make sure you are looking at them on pages 21 onwards, and you need to make sure that you put this as a heading and you write under all them. The third part of it is to analyse the impact of ethical requirements on human resource policies in an organisation. And you need to be looking at learning outcome 1, AC 1.3, okay? And here you will be looking at things like, you know, major issues in ethical management, things like equal opportunity, privacy, compensation, labour costs, what ethical practices within an organisation, ethical why it's so important to have ethical practice, and that will be pages 1.3, pages 27 onwards on learning outcome 1. Okay, so you need to make sure each of these is a heading. Carrying on learning outcome 1, you need to make sure you are looking at explaining. The next one is heading is explains, make sure there are subheadings and headings for this, okay? Explain the purpose of human resource policy. Do not, please, again, change the wording. For this one, you will look at learning outcome 1. Again, you look at AC 1.4, pages 32 onwards. So what do we mean by human resource policy? What is the importance of it? Why development of workplace policies and importance of them as well? Okay, so then the next one, so you've got evaluate the principles of discrimination legislation in relation to recruitment and legislation. So here you will be looking at learning outcome 2. You will look at elements of page 13 onwards, 2.1, types of sexual discrimination, direct discrimination, indirect discrimination, victimization, positive discrimination, and remedies. So you'll be looking at pages 13 onwards of learning outcome 2. Then the next part is, again, make sure these are headings, the ones in black. Critically evaluate the role of contracts in employment law. So again, you're looking at learning outcome 2, and you're looking at 2.2, which is critically evaluating the role of contracts in employment law, page 18 onwards. So the relevance of contract law, why it's so important, why there's a need for contract law, and the elements of contract law. Then you're looking at the final one of part A is to analyse the meanings, mechanism for establishing contracts of employment. And here you are looking at elements of contract of employment. So you're looking at express implied terms, contract of employment, probationary period, notice period, express terms, implied terms, varying terms. This is page 30 onwards. So you've got, for part A, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You've got 7 parts to do for part A, okay? 7 elements there. Make sure you have each one as a heading, okay? And then you write under the heading. You need to make sure it's clear. And part A is learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2, okay? So and here on the in red, it tells you where it is. You could use them and also put in more examples and work around answering what the question is asking you, okay? Now we go on to task 2, part B. Sorry, it's task 1, part B, okay? So task 1, part B, that's learning outcome 3, AC 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, learning outcome 4, AC 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. Okay, so in here again, you have got 6 parts to this. Okay, so you need to make sure you are using each one as a heading. So the first one on learning outcome 3 is to analyze the legislative procedural protection that exists for workers, and that's learning outcome 3. Okay, and you need to look at 3.1 in that and pages 6 onwards on learning outcome 3. So you need to look at the regulation of arbitration, trade unions and things like that in regards to it, why there's need for them, how they work, and things like that. Okay, then Second part of it is to examine the legal consequences of unfair treatment of an employee for the employer. And that we're looking at elements of 3.2, which is examining the legal consequences of unfair treatment of an employee for employer. And we're looking at pages 16 onwards. So you've got examples there as well. So if you're a job applicant, if you're an employee or a worker, and look at elements of Bullying Equality Act. And then the third part of it is to apply law relating to the nature of protection for workers to be given in a situation. So here you look at 3.3 AC, page 19 onwards on Learning Outcome 3. So you look at termination of employment, wrongful dismissal, so the nature of the claim, and you look at maybe garden leave on that as well, unfair dismissal, so things like entitlement to a claim, constructive dismissal, potential fair reasons for dismissals, whistleblowing. So you need to look at the elements of that, maybe look at the Public Interest Disclosure Act 1998 in regards to whistleblowing. So these are three parts to it. Make sure each one is a heading and you write under the heading. Make sure each one, do not change the wording of it. Then this is the other part, part B, the other question. So critically analyze the roles, and functions of different stakeholders in managing employment law relations. And that will look at the AC 4.1, and it's looking at key issue for employers. It's looking at individuals, page 7 onwards, and what contract law, so Employment Rights Act, Equality Act, collective relationships, employee relations in time of COVID, you could use that, managing employee relations and workplace conflicts, employee relations skills, the relationship between stakeholders in regards to this. So that would be the fourth part of part B. The fifth part of it is to look at assessing the impacts of external context and organizational level employment relation processes on organizational performance. And that's looking at AC 4.2, pages 16 onwards. So why we're looking at stakeholders' context, organizations' challenges, employees, the style of management, employee empowerment, flexible organizational structures, empowerment strategies, bargaining with trade unions, disciplinary standards and frameworks, employees' code of conduct and performance levels is really important, organizational conflicts, competitive work environments, and managing conflicts and implementing changes. So I also use quotes from academics and theories regarding this. Employee management strategies, improve communication is really important part of this as well. So pages 16 onwards for AC 4.2. And the last one of part B is to evaluate the significance and impact of the integration of employment relation processes on organizational policy, practice, and organizational outcomes. And this is looking at things such as the importance of employee relationship. And that's looking at 4.3, pages 26 onwards. So these three parts are to do with elements of a learning outcome 4. And you will look at 4.3, pages 26 onwards, things like, as I mentioned, importance of employee relationship, retaining loyal employees, increased productivity and reducing workplace conflicts. Also looking at antecedents to employee engagement. So looking at the voice, VOIICCE, in regards to the element of employer engagement. Also looking at employment relations and engagement, a collaborative approach. Looking at Pearson 2010 and looking at what his quote meant. Also comparing engagement and burnout in regards to positive engagement and negative burnout. HRM roles in regards to that. So things like being professional, the role rule enforcer, honest broker, champion and cheerleader, and what the expectation and the requirements are in regards to this. So look at elements of that. Make sure again, and I'll reiterate this for part A and part B, when you're doing each part of the question, make sure that's the heading and then you write under that. Make sure that's the heading and you write under that. So it's clear. Do not change the wording. Make sure it's all clear. That's the heading. You write under that. You write the answer under each heading. Okay, so it's clear for the person that's marking it that you're able to identify them elements. Okay, so delivery and submission of part A and B is one report and it's 4,500 words, excluding any sort of diagrams, references, appendices. Make sure for each, if you look at part A, you should be literally doing 2,250 words, and part B 2,250 words to make sure it's even. Referencing, so each section must reflect any supporting Harvard-style citations. A comprehensive Harvard-style list must be included in the end of the work, so a bibliography. Evidence, again, supported, and it needs to be 4,500 words. Referencing for part A and B, again, you should cite any case law, examples, academic and reliable sources. A comprehensive style list must be included at the end of the work, as we mentioned, a bibliography. Conclusion as well, a brief conclusion at the end of the assignment, and then reference list or bibliography. So now just a little bit on the guidance and support in regards to doing the assignment. So summary, make sure you start with an introduction and end with the conclusion, as I mentioned earlier. And I'll reiterate this to you each time so you'll be able to understand. Make sure you are using Harvard system for referencing, and you can refer to online sites that may help, such as Neil's Toolbox. And that's a site that's really helpful in regards to creating the reference for you. You put the details in and it creates it for you, and then you copy and paste it into your, make sure your bibliography is in alphabetical order as well. Using diagrams, make sure you reference them accordingly. Again, your reference list needs to be in alphabetical order. Try to use more examples when explaining certain concepts. For example, when looking at theories, practices, any examples you're using, make sure you are using more examples to elaborate a certain point. Make sure you are using assessment criteria, ACE, as a heading or subheading for each part of the task. So task 1, looking at ACE 1.1, each part of the task should be completed as a heading under that heading, and you need to be referring to indicative content all the time and checking your word count. Important points, give proper headings and subheadings, like I said, AC 1.1, where it says each part for part A. Make sure your document looks presentable and professional. Number your figures and tables, and follow the numbering on the assignment presentation as against the assignment brief. Ensure at least 12 to 15 referencing. Referencing should be in Harvard style. Keep a check on your word count, plus 20% tolerance limit on your plagiarism as well. That will be checked on plagiarism scan and scan. So make sure you are not using AI to copy your work or do any of your work, because it will come up as plagiarized. So make sure you are moving away from using things like AI. Word limit assignment report, 4,500 words. And the grading for this unit is a pass or a refer. Useful tips, read the task carefully. Make sure you are focusing on what the tasks are asking you and the command verbs. Broadly, as guidance command verbs, you can cover the task by writing explain, define, describe, 100 to 125 words. Assess, examine, clarify, analyze, 175 to 225 words. Compare, contrast, critically evaluate, 250 to 300 words. Harvard referencing, again, going back to the Harvard referencing, needs to be Harvard style, i.e. the author, the date, and the style. For example, Slack, Johnston, Brandon Jones, 2011 is in text referencing. In the reference towards the end, it will come as shown, so there'll be the full citation at the end. Give proper headings, subheadings, as I mentioned earlier. Make sure your document is presentable. Word limit is 4,500, and you have 10% leeway here. Plagiarism tolerance similarity must be below 20%, must be, because it will come up as plagiarized through AI then. So you need to make sure you are following the policy, okay? Disciplinary, you need to make sure you are not copying and pasting as you are, it's academic misconduct. You need to make sure you're not doing anything like that. Again, reiterating things I've repeated, make sure you reference all your sources, make sure you check your grammar and spelling and avoid using American grammar and spelling, which we've realized that some students tend to refer to the American style. Refer to ebooks and journals on Moodle for this unit. Any sort of resources you need to get are on Moodle, any additional readings on Moodle, any recordings for the learning outcomes on Moodle. This recording will be on Moodle for you to go on to. If using UK Varsity slides, then reference will be as below: MDT 2022, Bibliography, Multidisciplinary Teams, Learning Outcome 1, slide number 2 to 10, UK Varsity, published on 15th of January 2023. That's an example of how you would use it. Any questions you have, you need to kindly email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Submission of your assignment to be done on learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Submission is after 2 weeks of completion of this unit and its delivery. So now this unit is completed, you can get on with doing the assignment, and make sure if you have any questions, to refer to the guidance on these slides to help you with the assignment discussion. Also refer to Moodle as well, because Moodle will help you with any sort of discussion around your assignment, any sort of elements of doing the assignment, and any sort of elements of where you can get references, any additional reading as well. You need to be referring to Moodle, because Moodle is the main source that is being used for elements of doing the assignment, okay? Any sort of indicative content you're reading, your elements of that will be on there. Okay, I will just show you now. So the assignment discussion slides have all been recorded. They're all on Moodle for you. And I'll just show you an example of the assignment that is on there in regards to your assignment discussion. So I'll just stop sharing this. And then I'll just open up this, which... let's see if it's opened. Okay, so share this with you. So this is how your assignment will look on Moodle, okay? If you can see this, stop sharing. Sorry about this. So this is the assignment session on Moodle, okay? So this is what you should be seeing on Moodle. Sorry about that, it's happened again. So this is what is on Moodle, and the aim of the assignment, what it's expecting you to do, exactly what I've put in the assignment discussion. So your scenario is there, what you need to do. And this is how it would be structured in your assignment. So it will have all the details on there, which if you need to put on to doing your assignment, these are all the details: the course code, the reference number, unit title, unit level. Then you will go on to the scenario, which will give you a brief description, which I mentioned earlier on the scenario. Then task 1 of the briefing, part A. So each one, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in part A. So each one you need to highlight and then write the answer under each one, highlight and write the answer under it. And that is learning outcome 1 and 2, which I mentioned before. Part B is there, which is learning outcome 3 and 4. And so there's 6 parts to that. So the first one being that. All these are on the slides for you to do. Refer to the slides as well, okay? And then each part, and then write under each part. So each part is either referring to learning outcome 1, 2, or 3, and then or 4, and then which assessment criteria you need to follow. And then guidance, there is your delivery submission, which are on the slides as well, which is again 4,500 words. Make sure you do for each one 2,250 words for part A, 2,250 words for part B, and make sure you are answering what the question is asking you rather than thinking what you need to answer. So read around it carefully before you answer the question. Referencing, again, the main element that we use, the main site that we use is Harvard Referencing, again referring you to Neil's toolbox. For that, make sure you are using Neil's toolbox to help you, and at the end of the assignment, make sure you have a bibliography with the full references. And as I mentioned, 12 to 15 references just to be on the safe side. Also, make sure that you are reading what the assignment asking you. So, looking at the business research, and make sure you are following the learning outcomes here. So, and each learning outcome has the element which you need to answer. So each of one is what you're answering to answer the questions below your part A, part B of task 1. Okay, so make sure you are referring to the Moodle VLE. Make sure if you've got any questions, email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk, and make sure you submit via learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Make sure you are looking at the plagiarism policies. Make sure you are looking at all the policies on Moodle, and make sure definitely that when you sign the declaration, that none of your work is plagiarized or colluded. And make sure you reference your work in text and at the end as well. Okay, any questions, again, learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Now we've finished the unit, so you have 2 weeks to submit the assignment. Good luck with completing the assignment, and any questions, please email learnerwork@ukvarsity.co.uk. Thank you for attending today's session, and good luck with getting on with your assignment. Thank you.